Hi, this is DrClyde, and we're on step 5 of 6 to optimize your metabolic exercise. And in this step, contractility exercise or strengthening exercise, we're going to look at sprints and how it is similar to the effect of doing low resistance, high repetition strengthening, and then how the higher resistance, low repetition strengthening increases the engine size, not just the fuel burning rate that you get from the higher repetition and from the sprint work, which some people call high intensity training or high intensity interval training. So first, our training pyramid. The highest work output tends to not be at the greatest resistance that you could push or pull, but rather a bit below that so that you can maintain your normal cadence of everyday natural movement. That is where you have your highest work output, your greatest wattage. When you get to your maximum resistance that you can move for, let's say, 3 to 10 repetitions or 6 to 12 repetitions, somewhere in that range, then you're going to be moving slower because of how high the resistance is relative to your strength. And so that wattage tends to be lower. So the highest intensity isn't actually at your maximum resistance that you could push or pull. It's where you generate the highest power. That is with plyometric movements and with what's called functional training, where your nervous system is adapting to rapid movements in an athletic type movement pattern, not just increasing strength, but your nervous system's ability to coordinate your muscles maximally at the same time. That is functional training, that is maximum power. So at a slightly lower wattage is the highest resistance that you can push or pull. That's your maximum strength. And below that is an intensity where you can push and pull for many repetitions, more than a dozen, in particular more than 10. And then if you're going many dozens, even hundreds of repetitions, now your cardiovascular system is also coming into play. And so it's both an endurance and a resistance improvement. And then moving throughout the day might strengthen you if your fitness level is low, but even if, regardless of your fitness level, will keep your muscles idling continuously throughout the day. So some groundwork language. Repetition is one cycle of a movement, like opening and closing a door, or sitting down and standing back up, which is a body weight squat. And to get stronger, there's a couple things that have to happen in your muscles. There has to be a movement with an added resistance. So when you have a resistance against movement and your muscle is shortening, the membranes ripple and activate your DNA through a sensor for that from the high resistance shortening called the mechanistic target of rapamycin, which historically was called the mammalian target of rapamycin. So mTOR, same acronym, even though the name changed slightly. And when your muscles are lengthening under that same tension, there are muscle nuclei with their own membranes. So they're technically their own cells, satellite cells that are satellites to the muscle fibers. They're outside the muscle fibers that will fuse to the muscle fiber to increase the number of myonuclei, muscle nuclei, so that you have faster protein production for faster healing. So when you're pushing or pulling against resistance, during the muscle shortening phase, mTOR increases gene expression. And during the lengthening phase, that's where the tearing occurs. That's where satellite cells come in to increase the amount of DNA. So the combination of more satellite cells fusing with the muscle fiber to increase the amount of DNA and the activation of mTOR from the shortening phase to stimulate that DNA, it's that 1-2 punch that gives you the greatest protein production. So it's kind of fun sometimes to think about that when you're doing strength training. Like, let's say you're doing body weight squats, and on the lengthening of your glutes, there's some tearing, you're activating satellite cells, and then during the power shortening, you're activating mTOR. So increasing DNA, stimulating DNA, increasing DNA, stimulating DNA. It's fun. Try it next time. When you're at a resistance that you can't do for 10 repetitions, you have maximal tearing and activation of satellite cells and maximum activation of mTOR. So you have the greatest triggering to recover lost muscle mass, from yo-yo dieting, high stress, natural aging, and increasing bone density, so that you can have a maximal quality of life, not just lifespan, but health span, as they say. If you're going greater than 10 repetitions or a low enough resistance that you're moving slowly, then this is shifting not to increasing the engine size, but rather the ability of your muscles to absorb and use fuel, muscular endurance. So it's not the delivery of fuel, but rather increased efficiency of the use of fuel in your muscles. Now, all the way up to 20 or more repetitions, if you're moving quickly, then that's your highest power output. And so you're going to increase your strength and fuel delivery and efficiency of use all at the same time. That's maximal power, which is functional movement, functional training, athletic training. So your cadence for power would be around 1 second. The same as if you opened and closed a heavy door that wasn't so heavy that it slowed you down, or lifted a box and put it on a shelf over you that's not so heavy that it slows you down, right? What's the heaviest that you can do at your normal cadence? That is functional power. Okay, so as your intensity goes from very high to moderate, which is from power to highest force or strength to muscular endurance, you're going from a higher repetition, but quickly, a 1 second normal cadence, to less than 10 repetitions, to at a high resistance, to over 10 repetitions at a bit lower resistance. If the resistance is low enough that you're able to do more than 20 repetitions, that's where you start to creep into the inclusion of cardiovascular health at the same time. And if you're supersetting or doing circuit training where the heart rate stays high, then there's clearly a cardiovascular component to the strengthening component. And team sports, racket sports, field sports are all like that, where you're having to go for 90 minutes or more, and there's bursts throughout, with sometimes with some rest intervals, but there's a high power output and a cardiovascular output at the same time. So once you realize the importance of the strengthening component to resist the loss of muscle mass with stress, aging, low sleep quality, or to increase metabolic rate if you feel like low demand is your limiter, then the question becomes, well, how much, right? You want pushing, pulling, and leg exercises. Those are the three main muscle groups. And for the pushing muscle groups on the front of your torso, you want to be pushing in the horizontal plane as well as the vertical plane. So a pressing movement to the front, a pressing movement to the back, and the same with pulling. You want to pull in the horizontal plane and you want to pull down in the vertical plane. And then you add a couple leg exercises. You've got a half dozen body weight exercises. And we're going to be doing some videos on those with some friends of mine, so that you can see some simple things you can do with body weight and bands. But then how much do you do? What is the, so a set is where you do a repetition over and over again until you stop to take a break. And that might, if it's less than 10 repetitions, you're getting stronger. Where, you know, you're getting to failure at the end of the 10 repetitions. Your biomechanics would change if you continue to do it. And if you're going over 10, then that's the metabolic, the muscular endurance. So for strength gains, one set gives you about half of your genetic potential for getting stronger in response to that one working set. If you do 2 or 3 sets, you get most of the additional improvement that you would ever get, even doing 10 sets. And in this data here, it's 4 to 6 sets. You only get a 5% additional improvement in strength. So really, there's a dramatic diminishing of the return in strength improvement as when you do more than 2 working sets. So you warm up a little bit to minimize injury risk, and then you do 1 or more ideally 2 working sets of each major muscle group. There's 3, push, pull, and legs, of at least in the horizontal plane, pushing and pulling, and 1 leg exercise. So that's 3 exercises total, and more ideally, a couple leg exercises, and in the horizontal and vertical plane of push and pull. That's a total of 6 exercises. And that's it, right? In 10 to 20 minutes, you're done. And it can just be body weight or maybe some bands. You don't have to leave your home. Now, this, I keep talking about higher and lower repetitions and how the effect on the body is different, and it is dramatic. There are genuinely different training zones in strength training, just like there are in cardiovascular exercise. So in human subjects over a few months, when they do low repetition, heavier strength training, they double their strength, but they don't improve how much more they're able to do at low resistance. So let's say you're able to do a low resistant movement like a push-up. You're able to do a push-up, let's say 25 times, and then you start training your chest muscles really hard, and you go from bench pressing 100 pounds to being able to bench press 200 pounds or 250 pounds. So you double your strength, like here in this blue circle, but then you go to do push-ups and you still can't do much more than 25. So you increased the amount of protein that's contracting the muscle, but you did not increase your muscular endurance, then making it more efficient to do a relatively high power for extended periods of time. On the flip side, the subjects in this study that were just doing push-ups, so low resistance, they went from doing 25 push-ups to doing 50 or more push-ups. They more than doubled their repetitions, but they didn't get stronger. You put them on a bench press and they couldn't do more than the original 100 pounds. So you get exactly what you trained for. When you're doing a higher resistance, low repetition, less than 10, you get stronger. There's an mTOR and a satellite cell effect. When you're doing higher repetition, you increase the energy demand and therefore the muscular endurance, right? The use of fuel, not the delivery and fuel, but the use of fuel within muscle. Okay, so here's our practical application for increasing contractility, that's engine size, and efficiency, which is the muscular endurance. Focus on your largest muscle groups, that's push, pull, leg, 2 working sets in each plane of motion, horizontal and vertical, once weekly, less than 10 repetitions per set, ideally just using body weight without equipment or just something simple like bands. It can take a whole week to recover from the low repetition, high resistance exercise. And then at least once weekly, over 10 repetitions per set, body weight without equipment or just bands. And the higher the repetitions, the more times per week you can do this. You could do circuit training, high repetition, boot camp, so high repetition strengthening 6-7 days a week, as long as you're able to heal from it. See, that's dependent on your sleep quality, your stress management, and your nutrition, and the total training volume, the ratio between what the insult is to how well you're able to recover. There is no secret magic benefit to taking a day off or 2 days off, unless you're doing too much, right? The question is, are you healing or not? That's entirely dependent on how you're nourishing your body with sleep and nutrition and stress management. So cautions. Absolutely avoid injury, maintain perfect form, your normal biomechanics that you would use in everyday life. So functional training without changing biomechanics, which changes forces across joints, where your injury risk goes up significantly. Fatigue will occur in your prime movers, your main muscles or agonists first, after which your movement pattern shifts to support to supporting muscles on the sides, which shifts the forces across the joint. And core movements should never be done at very low repetition, because you don't want to injure the spine. So if you start putting plates of weight on your chest and doing crunches where you can't do more than 6, what are the chances that you're going to bulge some discs and ultimately rupture one of those discs, like I did at L4, L5, where I couldn't even go for a jog for a year and was getting headaches all the time? Much too risky to put high strain on your discs and your spinal. And one last thing on spinal posture, right? We have kyphosis, lordosis. You want to maintain that natural spinal posture regardless of how you're hinging at the hips, whether you're doing pull-ups, bench press. You always want to be thinking about that perfect spinal posture and maintain that. It's not going to change how many repetitions and how strong you are. Trust me. Focusing so much on the weight and how many repetitions that you forget about your biomechanics is a major mistake. And when you start paying attention to your biomechanics as the primary and the exercise itself as the secondary, you'll discover that you're just as strong and endurant as fit. And focusing on that biomechanics is actually relieving and frees up the brain to think about the exercise that you're doing. So practical efficiency overall, strengthening push-pull legs weekly, less than 10 repetitions per set, 1 to 2 sets per each of the muscle groups, once a week or more, even every day if you want, of the higher repetitions, so long as you're healing. For cardio, think about elevating your heart rate throughout the day with activity breaks, 1 to 3 minutes long every 1 to 2 hours, and then do some activity that's at least 10 minutes, if not 30, at least 10 minutes, where you're having at least once a week with 3 1-minute bursts and a single 10-minute long sprint. So short sprints, long sprint on alternating days. And then at least once a week, something where you're going longer than an hour at a lower intensity. activate your muscles periodically throughout the day, and think about the healing process. Do some breathing, some meditation, visualization, go for a short walk, 1 to 3 minutes. If not every few hours, then at least once a day. Don't let stress management fall off your radar. The cortisol response, the stress response, eats away at lean tissue. It reverses the healing to a degradation of that lean tissue. So nourish your body with sleep and food. We have separate mini courses on metabolic nutrition and on sports nutrition, and a separate mini course on the metabolic method that includes stress management and sleep quality, specifically as it applies to metabolism.